Hello and welcome to the Roundtable for another member interview podcast. I'm Kashika. Joining us this evening is a valued and knowledgeable member, Thorsen, with the second part discussing the ecosystem of humanity. Control your own code. Now, before we get into all of that, I'd like to remind you to join, follow, subscribe to our BitChute, our YouTube, and our YouTube live channels. But most of all, join us here in the Roundtable Discord server. You'll be able to find this plus well over 300 podcasts, recorded podcasts. We keep those in under the channels that are hashtag RT podcast and hashtag podcast series. Now, with all that being said, welcome to everyone. Welcome to the live audience. And welcome, Thorsen. How does one know when they're thinking critically, where one can measure with great scrutiny that they truly care where they are right and wrong in their worldviews, common sense, their idioms, beliefs, opinions, and understandings of when a fact is a fact or misinformation? Please let me know what that means to you, Thorsen.
So I think a lot of the base things here are epistemology, and then the further progression of those standards that need to be upheld of how we arrive at truth, how we understand specific concepts, to what logical fallacies are, to how we use idioms in our lives and how they ever adapt and change to our language, a huge list of things of how we communicate, how we hear one another, how we arrive at truth and are able to use those things to establish how our world changes. And unpacking the huge list of issues that are there, we're just going to start with a couple, but there's just an incredible list. I can't believe how long this list is. So one of the things we're to immediately get into after going over this scope is going through like with this most common cognitive bias that gets in the way of our ability to be able to get to more concrete answers, and we get this facade of us critically thinking, and we really aren't.
So how does that?
Go ahead.
Well, I
Sorry,
was just wondering
I
how
can just continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I am right now just wondering about how critical thinking can help a person with their worldviews or their opinions on things, or how they understand fact or non-fact misinformation.
Yeah,
How
there's
does
so much to
critical?
Yep, there's so much to unpack here, from different levels of logical reasoning to how the different ego war mechanisms of cult of personality, the othering mechanism that divides lines on ideologies, like the Wuhan lab theory. As soon as Trump promoted it as a possibility of where the virus is coming from, the left had to immediately adopt the exact opposite view. So the healthy conversation that needs to happen there, especially on something that's so grave, we just saw this happen in our national stage, that as soon as Donald Trump was for it, that the left had to be completely against it, and even use the way that, because the healthy manner in which we have conversations isn't happening right now, the way that people get to do things, other people to change their minds or their views, is using forceful, fearful manipulation. So they had to call it racist to have this idea, and then shutting down all discourse anywhere. That if you discuss it and you even think that it's possible, well, you're a horrible racist person. And so this divides this line on, we're not critically thinking, we think that we are, and this is just one out of a huge list of examples that we're fucking this up. We're not being able to have a national conversation about any complex topic, and we just see that not just on the Wuhan lab theory, but everything. Masks, when they're effective, why, when we lock down, where, what rules are in place. Like, everyone is just fighting over even just this specific issue, and how much it's affecting all of our lives, to any other issue that affects a person's life, and whether or not when they speak, the people around them can legitimately hear them, and they know how to engage in those claims as well. There's just a huge list of problems of these human pitfalls and many other things that we're to get into and break down that are making it to where we're not hearing one another as well as we think that we do. That's my view. I can just keep going. I was
Well, I understand that this is a situation or an issue that affects every aspect of every form of life, right?
yep, yep.
So,
This
how is it that the individual can take the steps needed to try to correct this?
Well, one, it wouldn't be just be any individual. I think that throughout history, what we've consistently seen is people come together if any amount of good change needs to happen. The amount of change that needs to happen today isn't just a handful of people need to, not become narcissists. We're dealing with a huge list of problems where our ability to have national conversations it's insanely broken. So that's one of the things of the scope for the outline. So the document, I linked it in the podcast chat is the four boxes of liberty. Our first one, our soapbox, when people trust that when they speak, if at least a good portion of the time, it doesn't have to be perfect, but a moderate amount of their ability when they speak on a particular issue, so it's the politicians of a particular political party, or it's the political pundits, or it's journalists, or whoever it is, the average person, when they speak about a topic, they feel there's some level of fairness, there's some level of standards being upheld. Like we can go back to before they broke the fairness doctrine in the 1989 that we were talked about in the last podcast. That as soon as that broke and they no longer were upholding standards of how we were supposed to arrive at truth and ensure we're not allowing different manners of propaganda and not representing the other person's side, the other side as fairly as possible, those standards slipped in our public sphere that then made it to where our households, how we're having conversations, even just that have nothing to do with politics, and it's like a husband and wife fighting over, money or whatever it is. It made us it devolved. We have this devolution of our ability to be able to hear one another, arrive at truth, see and care where we're wrong. We're really with a lot of anger, hatred, and resentment. We are thinking the other person is evil, they're wrong, they're immoral, and just a huge list of these things we can track, I think, throughout our society as we get better at looking at all this different data that we can show that we just continually lost the ability to agree, to make compromise, to care where an individual is wrong. And so to answer your question, what the average indie person could do is we need to come together. We need to figure this out together. We need to figure out exactly what's happening here and how we fix this, how we error correct for this, how we ensure that we're not going to be perfect about this. So this is even one of the many things that needs to consistently always be, we need safe spaces to speak. We need to be able to make mistakes. We need to have room for error, but there needs to be limits on those things. Just like when you and Kashik and I were talking I think on Friday night we were talking about like the rules that are inside of the RT server, the roundtable server, that the 2 minute rule, and then no one interrupts somebody else, and what those rules provide in matters of their value, and then how do we see value and when we follow rules and why it's good, and then how we also, if we ever need to in any scenario, how we're conversing when we need to update those rules, when we need to change them. And this is when we get to complex topics of like conservatism versus progressivism, how a person maintains their ideas that they think are values or principles anywhere in life of how something works, why they think it's good, being on time, or every time pay back a friend whenever you get a loan within a short period of time, or having the idiom of like agree to disagree, or practice makes perfect. These things, when we see they provide value to us, that we love them. They're great. They're amazing. But then we also lack the ability to be able to see when they need to change, when they need to get updated, and progress those ideas. We're having a really hard time having a conversation of how to progress and when it's healthy and what to conserve and why. And there's so many different dividing lines here. Again, that othering mechanism of the throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Is adoption? It's like the opposite adoption. Think of like a child growing up in the 1950s where the dad was an incredibly authoritarian asshole on everything, just literally dictating and yelling and barking orders. And there's still a lot of good that dad is instilling values and principles in there, but we're getting to the dark of it too. I don't want to make it seem like I'm attacking any gender or any race or anything like that. This is about even right here, controlling our own code, making sure we have fair assessments anywhere we look, and how we ensure we can do that, how we can measure it. So when we're looking at what happens here, the whole rebelling arc stories of where the child is rebelling so hard they think something to some degree. I call it the I'm nothing like you. Like they have so much hatred and resentment towards their parents that are not letting them have certain things. So wherever the parents are right, it is really good in terms of how they're parenting and the discipline and what they expect of their kids, and huge list of things that happen inside of a household on a daily basis that contribute. Even we can show that it that it contributes to many different people's mental illness. But when that conversation can't happen, the child like does this thing where constantly, as things get worse and worse and worse, and they have more pressure and they more think that they can rebel, there's a nuance here. There's nuance everywhere. There's not like as soon as a person ever rebels or says I don't like you or I hate you, they immediately just now every single they just lost all agreement. They can't find any establishing, you taught me how to, this good work ethic, or you taught me how to this is the way my dad cut vegetables, or whatever it is, a huge list of things that they just literally adopt the exact opposite. So the more extreme versions are easier to paint the picture. The exact opposite views of like they have to have the exact opposite like on everything. So then the mental gymnastics that people have to go through to support that, to make that happen. And I think that we're not just seeing that here versus a child and like a 1950s parent that's being incredibly authoritarian. I think we see it anywhere when we can't openly freely criticize. We don't know how to do that. There's a quote that I like to use, even though it's by somebody that I definitely don't agree with a lot of his views. But to see who rules over you, simply figure out who you cannot criticize. It's something along those lines. I think I missed a couple words there. But I think it's so powerful. And I even hearing this of some people recently of saying it in their own words, not necessarily they even know that quote. But it's so powerful. As soon as we can't criticize, if I have power over you in any way in a relationship, I'm your boss, I'm your husband, and I have financial power over you, or whatever it is, all these different places we can point when things aren't fair and you can't criticize me, and I get it to just use fearful manipulations to keep you like this. All of this builds resentment, irrational behavior, thought. We start tearing each other apart, not being able to criticize each other and call out when we're ever doing anything bad or wrong, or have bad views that are negatively impacting people.
So what does it mean? What's your own code? What is your own code? You're saying we need to learn how to control our own code. What does that mean? Our own. What is the code that we each have?
Trying to ensure that we're not doing the cult of personality thing where we prop up a leader and lack the ability to criticize what they say. And then we just defend any criticisms that come at our leader. Think of like a really staunch Trump supporter. You can't have a conversation with them about anything that the president's doing wrong. And we all have a light and dark. There are things the president of any president has done that are wrong and they need to be discussed in a national conversation. But when the vast majority of the people that support that person can't criticize their own leader, it makes it to where they're not controlling their own code. They're just regurgitating the things that their leader says for the most part. There's some nuance, but it's extremely small, and it gets worse and worse and worse the more the person, this is where we...
I'm still not understanding what that means with, let's say, my own code. What's my code have to do with whether or not I can critique a leader, or the leader accepts the critique? What does my own code have to do with that? Like what is my own code?
Because too many people look at a leader and they think that the leader is on the opposite side of them, or on their side. This othering mechanism gets in the way where the other side has to be wrong, and we do this thing where we change. So it's one of the things I said in the previous podcast, the largest form of bigotry. As soon as we say we don't like the other person, we would put forth less effort to care about a huge list of things about the other person that makes things unfair. We care less to engage in their claims, especially if we think that their claims are absurd. We spend less effort to show that they have they're right in different ways in their arguments. And there's a lot of different reasons why we're doing these things. Like as soon as there's something in our society that whoever's right more often, everyone wants to just give the power to that person, to that side. This happens like in small groups of people, like 10 people, like Lord of the Flies, to Republican versus Democrats at any time throughout American history. Imagine if 3 huge bills came up tomorrow from the Democrats and they all really fucking helped the American people. Well, then the Democrats are right. Look at this. Look at all this value we got from this side being right on this, all of this stuff. It helped our
So do
financial
you
system. It helped this, and so therefore the Democrats are right. And we think very binary on everything, and we have complex issues. We can't just pick a side for whatever it is that we're thinking. We have to. We can't control our own code even here within this binary system of splitting down. Like you can't have a nuanced perspective. You either are overwhelmingly conservative or you're progressive, and then if you are either one of those things, and there's definitely nuance here. Like myself as an independent, and there's definitely probably many independent and libertarians in this channel. But for the most part, people pick their teams, and then that team whoever's right more often gets the power, and we have to fix this system. We're not controlling our own code. We think we're just giving all of this power to these people that are soapboxes, are speakers in the public sphere, what's happening and why. Like Dr. Fauci
you know,
is a good example of this.
I always
Go
thought that people did that, or a big chunk of people, not everyone. I always thought that they did that because life is stressful. They're dealing with all sorts of other things. They make a
Sure.
couple of decisions on,
Yep.
I like this, I like that, I like this.
Yep.
That person does too. They know what they're talking about. I don't really know much about it. They've done
Yep.
their research. I'm going to follow them.
Oh yeah, definitely. And we need that too. I'm not trying to downplay any of that. We all can't be incredible like immunologists, experts on, or experts on all fields, even including just that one, just so we know whether or not we trust whatever information we're getting from our own leaders or who we trust. Like on some level, we have to be able to. There is some good amount of trust, but trust bonds are breaking down as the standards are slipping, the incompetence increasing, the ego war problems. So having that trust today is extremely difficult to do, and yeah, it's hard.
So, what is it within my, like an individual's code, that I should or could be changing about, let's say, like I was
Yeah,
saying, using that example,
let's get
life is
into it.
difficult. I'm not going to become an expert on everything.
Right.
I'm going to choose a leader that I choose to follow based on what I believe them to be an expert on for whatever. So is that something within me that I
There's
should
that
change?
there's
Okay.
that, but then also there needs to be a healthy form of being able to criticize. So if you have any problems with the leader that they're presenting the man or woman or whoever it is presenting information. It's an expert on the coronavirus, or they're talking about immigration policy. Whoever it is, you like for example, for me, like that is Tulsi Gabbard. I think there's a lot Tulsi Gabbard. Like if I could vote for her to be president tomorrow, I would. But it doesn't mean I agree with her on everything with her. I don't. And having that ability to ensure that we can criticize our own leaders, and they want that criticism because it makes them better leaders. That if we're offering them criticism of things that they are missing on how something works and how it's going to affect people, and especially when we're doing these massive scale complex systems of like our medical system, our financial system, and how the different, anyways, you get the point. Is there's so much complexity to each topic that they desire criticism. When we know how to perform good form criticism very well, and we're caring for all these human pitfalls. So as an average person, these questions you're asking, we need to care for all these human pitfalls as well as really care about epistemology to ensure. I put the definition here somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure. Oh, right here.
Well,
He's the
you
one who
did
left
bring up
for.
narcissism, right? And
Yep.
on the topic of whether or not a leader can accept criticism, would you consider that to be narcissism? And at the same time, are there healthy levels of narcissism? I think that there are, right? If a person's standing up for themselves, that's a level of narcissism. In other words, self care. Obviously, it's not to the extreme. So, are you saying
Hmm.
with a leader who's not um, who does not allow for constructive criticism or does not allow for the group to criticize them? Is that the level of narcissism that you're saying
Yep.
that needs to stop?
Yeah. So let me tell. So I voted for Donald Trump very
Okay.
begrudgingly. I think he is probably the worst president we've ever had. Joe Biden, I obviously saw as worse. So now it's Joe Biden, but it was Trump, and this for this reason exactly. And this is one of the things that just we just our national conversation, our ability to be able to criticize one another, just again it rears its ugly head. So during the BLM riots, General Mattis, who said previously he would never comment on a sitting president, came out and wrote like a 2-page paper that was printed in the mainstream media of his criticisms of how Donald Trump is dividing us as a country. Donald Trump didn't take any one point and go, okay, I can see what you're saying right there, and and like nowhere where he's wrong, and it also nowhere where General Mattis is right. It was just a mean girl personal attack on Twitter of how General Mattis is the most overrated general of all time, how he gave him his nickname, how Barack Obama and him had the great pleasure of both firing him. So there's even some trying to like there's some good behavior there. Like he's trying to bring the two sides together. Like he's acknowledging that one of his enemies, the previous president, that's on the opposite side. So there's some good here. Then that's the problem. Like we lack this ability to look at any situation and actually go through and want to meticulous like with some level of good accuracy say that was a mild bad behavior, that was a horrible view, that was a good view. Like there's this range of good views, good behaviors, but people pick sides before they even go into the conversation, or they immediately do and they see that they have to. And there's we can get into all cudgeling tactics and how people are silenced and blasphemy and all those other things. But I, like that's insane. A president should not be displaying that behavior on any fucking conversation. And that was that was our largest conversation at the time. We were dealing with all of these riots as well as really good protests that were happening. And then the rights were making those protests look bad, and we couldn't have a national conversation about the Black Lives Matter movement, what was happening with police brutality. Again, our national conversation was broken. We were terrible at having it. The president that got criticized, I think General Mattis actually brought up some really good, interesting points. Not one of them engaged in. This is terrible. This is how societies go. This is why I brought up the 4-box thing earlier, the 4 boxes of liberty. So our soapbox is broken. So then people look at the ballot box. And what do we think? Overwhelmingly, from my view, Republicans think that the election was not fair. So then we go to the jury, and they were constantly seeing that inside of the many different areas of our judicial system, things are, again, not fair. Even very specifically to the ballot box, that they think that many different times there was corruption, and there is corruption. There's corruption everywhere. I'm not saying that means every single thing that they were ever promoting is absolutely correct, because it isn't. There's a fuck ton of misinformation and garbage out there. That's one of the problems that we're dealing with. In sifting through these things, and that's why we have to be meticulous about them and standards of investigation, which is why epistemology is insanely critical for I believe every sovereign citizen has to just to love one another and know how we do all of this care, and like epistemology is above everything. It's how we see the world, how we understand ourselves, how we engage in conversation, how we are able to resolve conflict, or we're not. We're against one another. We're tearing, and what allows us to even get to this point, understanding that is upholding the standards of epistemology in all of these different areas, and
So I think
how
that
that's
that
been slipping over the
requires
last 30 years. Go ahead.
yeah, I think that that requires a pretty high level of self-awareness, right? Do you think that the majority of people do that? Do you think that the majority of people are actually thinking about their reactions or responses to things?
I think in some ways they are. We're promoting some of these ideas in our society, and we have been for a while. This is why there's so much nuance here, and we can go back to the 1980s. There's an incredible amount of compassion in human behavior where people are doing like just so many different areas where we can see people caring more about each other and making more instances more fair more often. Again, there's so much nuance to show that that was not happening, which is why I think we were in this mess. We need to move past this dominant submissive dichotomy where a certain small percentage of people are supported by the rest of society to be in charge and not be criticized. Like toxic masculinity, for feminism talk about toxic masculinity. I think this is what they're referring to. When a person has any amount of power, obviously they were only talking about men, but this is not just men. This is any behavior. This is why it's a horrible misnomer, and we can't even have a good conversation about the good points that they're making in their arguments about those things, just because them even labeling as toxic masculinity rubs the other side the wrong way, and too many people just immediately think that anything that they're saying, and this again gets to this whole thing of how bad we are today at debating and being able to care where we're wrong and caring about how we can see that. Like it's like the level of naivety, to the lack of slipping of standards, to how much we actually are legitimately displaying bigotry. Like I really do believe that we need to look at this whole thing, that as soon as we say we do not like a person, and there's a scale here, because obviously there's people that fucking hate people for their views and their behaviors. And we're seeing that more and more and more. But just starting there is that slippery slope that ever allows us to get to that place where people are in the streets just yelling and screaming at each other and enacting incredible violence against one another. We're seeing the escalations of these things everywhere from the political side, both political parties. But just saying I don't like the other person, we've now crossed the path of where we no longer love that person. There's some level of love, there's some level of mutual respect, but as I do not like this group, I do not like this person gets stronger inside of that individual, it will always overcome where they had empathy. One of the examples I like to use is this little white girl gets on stage in a pop culture movie very recently. It's called Fist Fight, where she sings, "I don't give a fuck about you and anything that you do," to her bully. And this is perceived as good behavior by too many people in our society. That would have never had been a protagonist in a movie of like 1980s, 1970s. It was always to love the bully and help them see where they're wrong. Not dehumanize them so much that you're like, I don't fucking care about you, and I'm up here singing to everyone and showing how much I own you and I'm better than you, I'm superior to you. And this is the manner in which we see, this is how we defend ourselves today against the attacks. And I'm not trying to condone any of the behavior the bully is doing. That's the problem. One of the many problems are here. We're dealing with high levels of bad behavior from all sides, of almost all interactions. High school bully and who she's bullying, to the left versus the right, men versus women. Just almost any dividing line. We're this problem here, the dehumanizing. This is why, what was that actress's name? She quoted something about World War II and the Jews and how they're like, as soon as we start dehumanizing the other and openly, publicly, this is what's going to lead us to, horrible violence like that happened in World War II. Gina Carano, and then she won the Ben Shapiro show after that. She was on what was that Star Wars television show with Baby Yoda in it. I'm blanking on it right now, but
you're bringing up a really valid point.
But as soon as they said that, they wanted to cancel. They cancel cultured her. They wanted her fired from her job because she said something that was calling out bad behavior from their side. So as soon as there's this thing where as soon as we call out the bad behavior from the other side, we're really bad at having that conversation. We can't openly criticize one another on our bad behaviors, and there's a lot to unpack there. But go ahead with your question.
So speaking on these bad behaviors, right? And I wanted to bring up the point that you were saying or making. Media, any form of media, whether it's commercials, TV shows, YouTube, whatever platform, What do you think? How do you think that that has an impact on people's behavior, their own people controlling their own code,
Oh God,
people
yeah.
people's behaviors with each
Um,
other?
I have another really good example is a song. I need to pull it up. I should have thought of it for this one, but like the song literally tells people like there's a lot of good behavior promoting ideas in the song, but at a certain point it literally says you're perfect, there's nothing wrong with you, and only the world needs to change. Like you can't get more narcissistic. I mean, maybe you can, but that's pretty a narcissistic statement. That's insane. That you're fucking perfect, and only the world needs to change, and that's promoted in a pop culture song that we all sing. And imagine people just like having like a really bad breakup, and then they go with all the different songs that make them feel good. Too many of these ideologies are constantly promoted that nothing is wrong with you. Do not care about validation. Do not care about other people. There's a lot of also good points to be made there because as the standards slip, our ability to validate any standard we're trying to uphold is also breaking right in front of our eyes as we don't even know how to uphold it as our ideology of what it is also less perfect as that continually gets as the idiocracy increases. Our ability to be able to see things clearly when we can't have conversations, we can't see the world. I think this is how
Now,
irrational
I don't.
behavior will always proliferate inside of our society. If everyone here listening to this podcast, if the more places they go inside of their lives of just things like at their work, their home, as they speak, they're not able to be heard, and they can feel that, they can see that in so many different measures, and this builds resentment. And also the thing I was getting to is rational behavior, like and rational thought that comes from that behavior because when we can't see the world and we can't critique where we're wrong in it with other people because our ability to even converse has been so damaged, we start losing our ability to correctly see these things. It doesn't mean we all just go to zero and we become incredible idiots and we can't do anything right, and our error rate goes from 0 to 100 day the very next day. But this does build up over time. At the more places we can't go into and better see how the world works and what's going on here and error correct with other people. Think of like a girl that just broke up with her boyfriend and she goes to her friends right after that, not just to seek for comfort, but what I think one of the many things they're doing is she's talking about the different problems, and then they are trying to give what they think about those problems. And even today, one of the many things that happens that I'm constantly seeing, that woman, and I'm not, this again, this isn't just about sexting because it's both sides of this is happening. They're getting very little that they need to do anything differently. In fact, they're often getting something to the effect of like, oh, he's such an asshole and he's so bad and he's so wrong, and he is in so many different ways as the bad behavior increases. So there's a lot to pick out, and they
Okay,
focus on
so
that,
in that
and then
particular,
they lack the ability to
in that,
criticize their own friend. They don't want to do that. They don't want to tell
how
a
would you
friend
see that
in
whole
any way that they're
scenario?
wrong too often.
How would you see that whole scenario improved? Let's just choose that as an example of how an individual, can control their own behaviors, their own ways of responding to a situation. What would be an example that you would think would be a better way of dealing with that type of situation?
In order, well, first off, it needs to be we're together on these things and we understand that, not just one person. Because one person trying to uphold their own code and create standards around people they're connected to that do not care about those same standards and they can't agree on those things, and like you can only do so much in those scenarios. So you have to have at least some level, like in the RT server, those rules. The more people that adhere to those rules, then the value of what those rules being instituted gets to be yielded from in those conversations, making it more fair. But if you're going to more situations where the rules don't make sense, or they are definitely not fair. An example I could thought of was Bill Nye Saves the World, Netflix special. I don't know how many of you guys have watched it, but it's really interesting. There's definitely a lot of good information in it too. But one of the places we can see where the conversation is not fair, I think glaringly, they bring on, they talk about energy. I think it was the very first episode. They talk about climate change. They talk about energy production. So they have this panel, like he is talking to a bunch of other people about the way that like wind and solar and things like that. So he has those experts, but he has one on nuclear energy. He doesn't let that person talk. He downplays every single claim that the person about nuclear energy was ever promoting, and he gives him like 30 seconds to talk. Like he cuts him off constantly. And it's just incredible, unfair scenario about in a really important conversation. We can see that people are not playing fair. So controlling our own code is really difficult in a scenario where more conversations we're going to are not fair. So the first step is to find more people that actually want to continually make conversations more fair in situations, and find this healthy amount of agreement that we have to have in order for things to work to some moderate well. Again, things do not need to be perfect. We'll have to figure this all out tomorrow, but we do need to start coming together, finding other people, so because then you will be able to create control your own code better, as the other person has that also as their base motivator too. They want to do that as well. So then we start developing and looking at the many different things of like logical fallacies to different levels of logical reasoning to different biases and all these different things. Those people inside of those areas, as we expand upon this, we're caring more about those things to ensure we can hear the other person, to ensure that if we're ever getting anything wrong, we can see it as soon as possible. We have that maturity that if we were really fucking wrong and we did something that even really hurt somebody else, the closest we can get to having really good levels of discipline and maturity to be able to say, okay, yeah, that fucking sucks, and I'm really so, being able to deal those things and talk about how we go through those scenarios of creating these different aspects of maturity inside of our society, and how we uphold those standards, the requirements that'll make that happen instead of any individual.
I've noticed how there's that saying of for people searching for their own tribe, right? Basically looking for others with their similar views or uh, interests or whatever. People searching out other people who are like them, like-minded,
Yep.
looking for different groups that they fit better in, as opposed to what may be around them at the time, right? All because of how others interact with each other or how others interact with that individual. That's basically been around for a very long time, but now there's actually a phrase for it, right? I'm going to find your tribe. Um, so, do you think that because of the fact that division is more prevalent now in society, that more people are actively now searching out for their own tribe, whereas in the past maybe that wasn't the case?
There's definitely a lot more broken people inside of our society that are hitting many different rock bottoms of their capabilities, their physical, their spiritual, their emotional. And I'm sure we all have those stories of what's happening there. So definitely, there's a lot of people that are trying to wake up and figuring out what's going on here.
Well, loneliness is at an all-time high right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Even though
pretty
we're
insane.
really connected with the internet and allowing us to speak to each other from distances, people are more lonely now than they ever have been. And that, do you think that this has to do with the division that you're talking about? The fact that people are basically not controlling themselves, not controlling their own code?
Yeah, standards have been just slipping everywhere. So as soon as you even bring up a good point about something where somebody feels that, um, they'll go through any mental gymnastics to not even let you know you made a good point. Just to make you look bad, to continually just make sure that only their side is right and superior. And so like Tim Pool brings up that he thinks the right doesn't think the left is evil, but I'm constantly not seeing that. I know people that are Republican and they think Democrats are evil. They're using that, and he even started using those terms more recently when he's criticizing the left as well for their behavior. Um, but yeah, it's really nightmarish. That I think what we need to look at is like even just like with trying to take 1 year of time, every single person, like the whole like the Kevin Bacon 6 separations of Kevin Bacon, how much we all affect one another. as different news stories and conversations are happening, we see these things, and we all have different avenues of different social medias that we can do. And some people definitely are trying to get away from those things because of this reason. And I'm trying to elaborate or quantify it in some measure. Like just this huge list of, even just in one day out of that year, how many interactions did you, everyone listening to this, and myself, like, that we affected other people, then they affected those other people, and then how that this the high rates of bad behavior that we're doing, that we believe that we're justified to do, and there's a lot to go over there, from ghosting to I actually think shaming is a bad behavior that we shouldn't be doing, as well as mockery. Just try and track the last year, the amount of mockery inside of our society and the damage that has done. I think it does an incredible amount of damage when people we should have mutual respect in order for joking to be funny for both parties, of any two groups of people, any siblings, whoever it is. There has to be a healthy amount. It doesn't need to be perfect, but there has to be a healthy amount, a moderate level of mutual respect. And
would you consider that part of that step one that you're talking about, the fair conversations?
yeah, identifying so many of these different bad behaviors that we're all doing, and we think that like we just have really bad logic wrapped around these things. I see this constantly. Anytime I try and call out somebody's mockery and how much I'm showing that they actually have like a good amount of hate for the other person. Like, it's not just a joke at that point. It's not a fucking joke at that point. And it's constantly going under the guise of it's just a joke. And we
What would
absolutely
you
should be able to joke around about a huge list of things. We should be able to laugh at ourselves in so many different ways, but we can't do that in an unhealthy environment. When people are legitimately, just look at the word contempt. People have contempt for another person, and then they're joking. Their motivation and their ability are tainted and severely changed on how they are joking and why they're joking about the other person.
Well, you just brought up a healthy environment. What would you consider a healthy environment for a conversation, a fair conversation to take place?
I think we need to start putting up many of these different things of like necessity and the contextual environments of what these conversations are. Obviously, we can't just all tomorrow just start having 8-hour conversations about everything for everywhere we see any problem. So there's going to be different rules and different things that are fair. Oh man, trying to establish that's interesting. It's really difficult. I believe one of the even things that I'm constantly seeing inside of even some of these different intellectual servers is that it feels like too many of us are operating on this premise of like, I'm a good person, I know what logical fallacies are, whatever it is. We understand some level of epistemology. We can see where we are good at understanding a complex topic, engaging other people, and it feels like too many people think that like they have it 100%, or they're close to, like, so they're not doing the same bad behaviors they're seeing other people do. This brings up an incredibly important thing that I think is constantly happening everywhere. That's one of these sliding scale factors that we can really continually look at. This letting it go thing that constantly happens instead of like, especially interpersonal relationships. So when you just started dating somebody, you now are in boyfriend-girlfriend status, so it's like 6 months in. There's 6 months of lots of different interactions, of different bad behaviors people are not saying about to the other person, and these things build up. So they're like at 20th percentile, 30th percentile, until things get really big and heated, and then more stakes and things are at play. Also, people are just constantly avoiding like any amount of conflict inside of most dating interactions anyways today. So they find out that their ability to actually like hear one another is really fucking bad, and like too late. Like there's just all this bad behavior, and they even start using those things to, well, I never thought that was the thing that you I didn't even like that thing, and you just, whatever it is, like they're just constantly even using that buildup of that bad behavior they never talked about. Like it just all comes out all at once. And Then they also have all this anger and hatred, and they're not seeing that. This is also one of the problems. We're having these behavior economy trauma variables of, like, when somebody's snapping in society, I think that they are angry at the other person, that they do believe that there is some sort of disrespect that is happening, and they feel the situation in some way is unfair. The other person is doing something they don't like, but
So that's part of the fair. Oh,
due
sorry,
to
go
the
ahead.
level that they're angry and they're snapping, they're yelling, and they're escalating their behavior. That's the pile-on thing from all these other places. They haven't been heard, and then finally a lot. Like, this is why I think, like, one of my friends is is sales a person that helps with, like, feedback and, customer service, and this is why I think people, you lash out at them like crazy, because in the more vulnerable places where we feel that this person isn't going to have horrible repercussions for us, they're not going to do something back to it. Because if we did those same bad behaviors to our spouse or our children, there's a lot of negative repercussions for our actions there. So they want to do it, and so they're not able. So all of this build up stuff, the letting it go of bad behavior from both sides, as it builds up and people are snapping at each other, and the blame game wars consistently happen over, months and weeks and years. It's not taking years anymore. There's so much bad behavior that it's just insane amounts. And anyways, but it's not letting things go. Like, we need to openly talk about the smallest bad behavior we think, and this gets into, like, complaining and whining, and which is one of the TED Talks that I talked with you about that we were going to look at, where there's a TED Talk that literally says there's 7 deadly sins that we are all doing in conversation. He brings up the worst forms of these things: judging, complaining, gossip, and obviously there's others. And not providing at all, even any amount of nuance, that there are good forms of these things. I really believe, like, in its basic definition, complaining is just identifying issues. If you have a concern, something is bothering you in any way, you have a thorn in your side, you're worried about a vaccine mandate, you're worried about if you're going to make it work on time, you have concerns that are valid, that should be discussed, and you should be able to speak, and the people around you should know how to engage in those claims. And we're this is another one of the many different problems that we're dealing with. Like, we're blaming the wrong thing. We're saying judgment's the problem, and seeing high rates of bad form judgment, and not knowing we need good form judgment. So too many people are adopting they should never judge anything ever mentality. They should never criticize anything ever, because criticism is only for your enemies. Criticism is only an attack in this ego war that we are all in, just sending out slews of status tweaking attacks. So one of the many points that in this ego war thing of the dominant submissive dichotomy is that there are thrones in all these different places in our society: our home, school, work, local, federal government, of people that actually have immediate control over the decisions that are being made. And their lack of ability to actually ever be criticized, and how much they will not be criticized. Just like how Jimmy Kimmel came out recently saying Kamala Harris's approval rating is so low because of sexism and racism. We're blaming sexism and racism when it's actually all of these different problems that we're not hearing one another, and we're saying that it's something, trying to identify it, and there's a good motive there. We need to be able to. So this is like going back to, like, 1800s, when a man. So what I'm trying to get to here is trying to identify bad behavior. Sexism is trying to identify. I think it is very bad form trying to identify bad behavior. Think of, like, 1800s, when a man could take his wife to a mental institution and have her committed for high rates of irrational and hysterical behavior. I truly believe the vast majority of those women at that time were displaying those behaviors, and it isn't because they are women. It's because they
So
were
identifying bad behavior, is that part of a step 2 to correcting all of this, like correcting one's code? The step 1 was the fair conversations, right? And now, are you saying step 2 would be identifying bad behavior, whether it be in conversation or environment or in one's own behavior?
Yeah, identifying bad behavior and then also understanding when our logic is really wrong. Like we think that we understand how something works. So a man in the 1800s thinking that, well, women are displaying this irrational behavior because they're women. And there was so many doctors that were trying to find like different organs and different mechanisms that were causing these high rates. I really believe it's because these women were under oppression. They didn't have a voice in their own household. And it's the same thing with all of this. The dominant submissive dichotomy was inside of their households. The vast majority of the people in society supported the man to be supremely in charge. Like one of the examples that I thought even recently happened, this husband is talking on TikTok about how he gets to make his wife submitted to him on she's not going to get the vaccine, and he gets to have that control over her, that he has to fall in line and do what he says. This is the dominant submissive dichotomy, where one person just gets to authoritarianly make massive decisions for the other person, based on very little understanding of why we're operating that way in our society. Why do we give people insane amounts of power like that? And the vast majority of Christianity and different religions have this patriarchal thing, which definitely did that men were in charge, they're the leaders, they make the good decisions, and there's a lot of good there. It's a fuck ton of good. That we can go over the last 200 years in America to many other civilizations that have this patriarchal system. There's still a lot of good there. But we lack the ability to see where one side has supreme control over the other to a pretty large degree, and it shuts down discourse. We can't, anytime you even criticize any of them, it is blasphemy. It's like Catholicism versus science, that as soon as you have any dissenting opinion against any of these people in the Game of Thrones, wherever they're at, anytime we go back to the 1960s, we go to today, whoever's sitting on this Game of Thrones. In fact, this is one of the things that I call flip the script, where we went from most of society supporting men to be supremely in charge inside the authoritarian leader inside of their own households, to women. And instead of fourth wave feminism, if I'm mischaracterizing any of the books or anything like that, and I'm missing information, I want to know as soon as possible. But from what I can tell, they didn't say, okay, we need to move past the dominant submissive dichotomy. We need to make sure we know how to do these things together. But instead, they're just displaying the same shitty fucking toxic masculinity behaviors that they are criticizing to be in control. And we have to learn how to move past this.
I know throughout history there have been many cultures that have a balance. There have been many cultures that are matriarchal. There have been many cultures that are patriarchal, right? But when it comes to step 3, so that'd be identifying bad behavior as a way to correct one's code, or the code of a country, or the code of a population, a group, or whatever. What would you consider being step 3?
Analyzing yourself as much as possible. Record as much of your conversations and replay them as much as you can fit it into your own life. Think of like sports teams, football teams that they analyze the replays of their games to do better. This thing that we're even discussing is a complex performative process that we have this incredibly wide range of good behavior to mildly good behavior to incredible behavior here, and then the exact same on the opposite side. So there's just so much range for us to. I mean, look at our forefathers. They wrote the incredible American Constitution. They also held really terrible views all at the same time, when they had incredible nation-building intellectualism of providing checks and balances, to even where one of the more salient points that I think that I'm constantly trying to iterate here in some manner, and I'm not always doing it very well, is that we continually iterate everything. We continually advance. That instead of ourselves, instead of a document, this is what our forefathers did. They allowed even their words of the most salient things of what they put in there, the amendments. They so even why they called them that, so that we can amend them as we see fit. They didn't say, here's the 12 fucking commandments and everyone fucking just do them and just we're in charge. They figured this out. We need to continually iterate our own ideas, our own idioms, how we operate with one another, how we arrive at truth, how we hear one another, how we make, and the core tenet for all of that is continually making things more fair for every single person. This is why, like, for this whole thing that I call it the science of universal love, soul, because we need to love everyone and figure in everything, but that doesn't mean that we don't kill it. Like, I'm a carnivore. We're omnivores, and I believe in killing animals for us to survive. But having this symbiotic, empathetic relationship with them and caring for them and their lives, actually, even just if you want to go from a selfish standpoint, it still benefits us. The better lives they have, the better the nutrients from whatever it is. And we can see this inside of our farming industry, that the worse it is, we're eating really low quality nutrients that are very terrible for us.
So I guess that would be part of a healthy environment, aside from like fair conversations being emotionally healthy, or the actual health of each individual is actually very important as well. Whether or not they've gotten enough sleep, proper
Yep.
nutrition, they have their needs being met, right? Is that
Yeah,
part? That's all part of the healthy environment.
in the analysis of this, of the doing the replay thing, that would be another part of it, part of the same thing. Analyze yourself, know yourself really well. Start tracking everything: your amount of sleep, to what your understandings are of that, how much you butter, whatever it is you think that are problems, and anywhere we can. It's kind of like a video game, like you different agility and intelligence, but you're trying to measure, where you think you're out of your emotional capability due to how lonely you are, or and trying to even somewhat quantify that and then track it a little bit, as much as you can. That makes me think of the quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." I think the more we examine our own lives and each other's lives, and we can do that better, we actually see ourselves better, each other better, and I really believe this is the core fundamental of how we love one another. So good form appreciation of the person's light, and then good form criticism of the person's dark, and vice versa. So the better we can have those conversations and analyze and measure and test ourselves and make sure we're not ever fooling ourselves, we're not patting ourselves thinking we're critically thinking, well, we're fucking not, and we're actually just calling everyone else horrible narcissists when we are also just playing a lot of narcissistic behaviors that we can't see, because this is one of the scary fucking things that happens with all of these things and this bad behavior proliferating in our society, of the different mechanisms that are at play. So people think that, so I even heard this on a date that I was on. This woman said, if anyone ever attacks her or her family, she will give it back to them 2 times. Now imagine if, and maybe she doesn't really fully mean that, but let's just say that she does, 100%. So if she thinks she's getting a level 4 bad behavior from somebody, and it's not necessarily she's even thinking level 4, level 10, but they are measuring it in some way. And so then she gives it back to, well, I'm going to give you a level 8. This is what you deserve. You attacked me. And if everyone did that, starting now, there we go, code, that is not mathematically possible. We would see we would be at each other's throats, and it would be worse. We wouldn't even find like small groups within inside of ourselves. If we're constantly, every time we think that the other person is being unfair, we're giving it back 100% to them. There's no grace. There's no mercy. And there's no room for error in the conversations or any of this, and we can't talk through it and work through it. There's no compassion. There's no understanding. We will literally not exist even a week. It'll be like an incredible, like the worst disease ever to hit mankind. Like the coronavirus or any other virus, just ripping through society. It would just overnight, you see all these different hot spots, and it would look like a virus took us over. But it was a mind virus. It was our inability to be able to hear one another, and the code that we're using to feel things are fair or they're not, and constantly thinking, no, I got it, I fucking got all of this, I know what's going on here. We're so intelligent. We have all this medical science, and I can trust my authority figures, and all of this level 1 logical reasoning that gives a facade of us critically thinking. And there's some good there. There really is still. There is. But overwhelmingly, we are fooling ourselves, and we actually are doing horrible judgments to the people that we care most about. And we think, oh, they're just making excuses. And we're not seeing the many different things that's actually making that person's mental load, their capabilities, draining. Especially like when like Republicans talk about like people either being able to be financially stable or inside of our society, that they're promoting it. Well, all you have to do is hard work. no, the fucking system is unfair, it's very corrupt, and very few people can get through. And they even are holding up the conversation of us understanding how all that works because of their inability to be able to, wherever they're missing things and they're wrong and they don't know how to iterate and advance their own ideas, they don't know how to progress them, we all suffer. If it is true that we are having massive amounts of income inequality that is it is insanely, look at the stats, it's incredible. But now we can see Republicans are somewhat waking up to these different things as it's affecting them more. So the conversation's starting to change, and that's really interesting to see in our society. I'm seeing more Republicans actually calling out, like, there's these conglomerates that are going across the country and paying in cash like 40% above asking for housing. Like over this whole coronavirus thing, we're seeing this incredible massive transfer of wealth, and so they're bringing up at this point and then bringing up that example as well as some others. So they're starting to get a little bit better understanding that the system is broken and it isn't fair for the average person. But I'm still not
I've been
seeing
hearing.
that their conclusion of that, oh, we'll just work hard and have good heart, ethics in your ability to start a business or, in your career, and everything's just going to work out really well. Like with our college system, when there's insane corruption everywhere, it is literally
Yeah.
everywhere. And it's like
I've
all
been
these
hearing a
different
lot
places.
more people from different walks of life, from different parts of the globe, crying out for help more than I've ever in the past.
Yeah.
And it's, like I said, at all levels. And they're trying to reach out. And it's a scary thing. It's a sad thing, right?
Yeah.
So what's another step? Aside from, okay, step one, fair conversations, um, healthy environments for those conversations. Step two, identifying bad behavior. Step three, analyzing of that behavior, meeting your self needs, examining your life.
Yeah, you're
I
doing it
guess how
off
you
really well.
act
As
with each
much video conversation that you can get. We're missing so much data when we are conversing over text, and
other. Oh
many
yeah.
other forms. We're missing tone of voice. We're missing facial expressions, and micro expressions, which is a whole other complex topic of like
Mm-hmm.
the field of Dr. Paul Ekman. There was a whole television series made about him called Lie to Me, a fictional depiction of it. But and he even wrote a blog about each episode to see what they showed in Hollywood, in the Hollywood production, what was right and what was wrong. It was really interesting, like all these different facial expressions that we have, that are very involuntary. But yeah, so as much as video as we can, and this is hard. This is really difficult. So even doing that, because things are so chaotic and things are so bad right now, even a person recording themselves, if they don't have a healthy way to be able to ensure they're either not going to be overly self-deprecating as they analyze their behavior, or the exact opposite, and they're narcissistic and they see way less of it, and then they're watching that with other people. So like, let's say people were taking some of this advice and friends were it's more often it's not going to go really well if we don't have some manner of good health in these environments, and we can measure that some way. And I'm not exactly sure how to do that. I think that's a really good conversation for us to have. Like, how do we measure these things to even know we can start on these things? Because I'm even seeing too often with people that really care about people inside of these Discord servers, we're doing all these different bad behaviors that too often we're not saying for the other person. Passive aggressive behavior and a huge list of other things, like we feel like we weren't being heard, or our the person isn't engaging in our claim, they're straw manning it, or they're at least not steel manning it to some good degree, which is another complicated thing that I really want to get into. Steel manning is incredibly interesting and important, especially when we get into the level one logical reasoning that people have around listening. Like, it's just as simple as a person not talking and letting the other person talk, and listening. All of these different human pitfalls while that person's listening can absolutely be at play. We're not calling them out, and we're just saying, no, but they listened, and then now it's their turn to talk, and then they display the same so many bad behaviors, and we're getting so much wrong here. So figuring this out, like how we can make these different environments safe, and we're trying to ensure that we're caring for so many different things, like people just trolling and it's hard. It's hard to know when to cut people off, when to kick them out of servers, when to not be their friend anymore. But I think we're constantly seeing that it's in incredibly high levels. Everywhere I'm looking, and the people that I talk to, more of their interpersonal relationships there are dissolving, or there's a lot of toxicity, and they're hanging on by a thread. They feel like they can't say a huge
Mm.
list of things to this other person they care about, and like that other person is suffering. Like you were talking about how many people are suffering today. So we're all suffering in so many different ways and capabilities. So we care about each other, but to have each other inside of each other's lives, like I saw this with a friend of mine recently, where she saw that I had not showered in like, I don't know. I was in an incredibly suicidal place at the time. She didn't know that though. But I hadn't showered in a really long time. I had a business client coming to my place, but I knew it was like this really low level one. It was just a simple $40 I was making, and I definitely should have showered. I definitely should have. Like I had a lot of things different, but she was criticizing me on what I was doing and why and how it was unprofessional, and I would agree with her. I'm telling her so many different points that but then she's just like not understanding my life at all, just immediately going into just giving advice. And then if I don't take it 100%, then I can't be her friend. And there's actually a good error correcting thing that she's doing there, even though it's a bad behavior that we're all doing that we need to stop. She's fearing that I can't change my own life. And she's wondering if her efforts that she would ever put in me and invest in me and care about me are worth her time. She cares about me. She's giving me advice. She's talking to me. But if I can't ever change myself, and she's trying to see that, like, am I talking to another? Oh, and I even saw like this fear flash on her face as I gave her any amount of like, I'm trying to help bring it to a more broader. But I was also like hurting at the time. I wasn't in an incredibly cognitive, producing thought space anyways. Like, and I was really hurting and suffering. So it was hard for me to even convey that to her. But as any way I was trying to show her that where she probably would call pushback, like she just fear, like immediately in her in eyes, and I've really felt like, oh man, it's got to be why. Like I'm not saying there isn't more there, but like this error corrected thing of we care so much, and we have like this finite source inside of us of what to care about and who to invest our time in and our thoughts and our care and our love and our money and our affection and all these huge lists of things that we exchange in the behavior economy of our social interactions, and whether or not that interaction is going to be overwhelmingly good and positive and we can survive inside of that and we're getting this symbiotic relationship that is healthy for us, or it's not and it's toxic and it's tearing us down, and we can't keep giving more and more to another person that can't change. So there's a lot of good in her saying, oh, you're making excuses and just shut the fuck up and just do what I'm telling you, even though there's a fuck ton of bad behavior there. We shouldn't be talking to each other in that manner,
Yeah. What about
and
trying to
forcing our
change?
world views on that person. Like they have to take it 100% or we're out. Like I can't be your friend unless you, like I just said all of this stuff. You need to accept it. I'm giving you advice. I'm telling you what, in fact, they say this thing, like I'm telling you what you need to hear. And they're making good points. Every single time a person's saying something like this to like a friend, loved one, they're making good points, but they're acting like it's like this thing that's happening in our society. Like everyone's like I'm sorry, I'm playing with something, but I know he's probably bothering, but
You're getting very passionate about that's for sure, which is good, right? I get it.
yeah. I'm so passionate about this topic. Like I see the pain and the destruction just everywhere. Like
So in that
I
situation,
start waking up to these things. Like it's
the error correction, would you consider that um, for a fair conversation would be for the friend to say, this is what I see, A, B, and C. And then if you accepted it or did not accept it, it would be no different outcome aside from is that what you would mean by
well,
error correcting?
it's really complicated. I think we're getting into the complicated topic of unconditional love and what it is and how it
Yeah.
works. Where people have a limit. There's a fucking limit, and we're constantly seeing there's a fucking limit. Everyone has where they're saying, no, I can't have this relationship anymore. I can't do this anymore. And so unconditional love, I think, is there's a lot of good here. We need room for error. We need room of being able to make mistakes as long as, and it doesn't need to happen at the immediate moment, but at some point within a short period of time within those two people's lives, let's say it's a husband and wife, that they will have a conversation about that. They'll unpack it. They'll figure it out together, and not just let all that bad behavior that the other person is dealing with, that they're frustrated with, continually just to get worse.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much, Drew. Thorsen, you've been passionate and brought up some very beautiful points. I would like to open it up to the audience right now. I know that there were a couple of people that were asking to ask questions. I'm going to open it up to the audience. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question for Thorsen?
Well, I've got a lot, but I think I'll let other people go first.
Okay, aside from Drewish, is there anyone that would like to ask a question?
If you got
all right, I guess I'll go then. I'll turn on my camera. As you said, voice communication is important, right?
Yeah, the more we see one another, yeah.
There we go. So, gosh, do not take this the wrong way, but a lot of what you were saying, I'm like, oh man, it sounds like I'm hearing myself 7 years ago. And I know that that sounds dismissive, but I don't mean it that way. First, a couple pointers. Okay, when you're swearing and you get emotional, it almost comes off as aggressive, and I know you don't mean it to be that way. But early on, I was like, why is this guy angry? Oh, no, he's passionate, but I mistook that as anger. And I know that speaking about communication was one of those things you were trying to focus on. I saw you jumping back and forth between parasocial relationships and interpersonal relationships quite a bit, as well as value systems and epistemology quite a bit. And I know you're trying to give pointers, almost kind of like a manifesto or a self-help, but I want to know what your focus is. Is your focus on how you know what's true, how you interact with other people, or how you communicate, or know what's true in an argument? Like, what's your focus here?
I mean, pretty much all of that, as well as a huge other list. I believe this is the most important topic that as soon as we figure this out, at least well enough, we will start fixing so many of the problems inside of our society, because we'll actually figure out how to establish a healthy amount of agreement when it's necessary, how not to use very simplistic idioms of agree to disagree everywhere in life. As soon as disagreement arises, we know how better to get through disagreement and who is right and who is wrong to some measure. It's complicated. We're dealing with really complex sciences of how things work and peer-reviewed studies and all these other things we can unpack and get into, scientific method and such. But yeah, it's hard to say there's a focus other than, the main topic is the ecosystem of humanity. Like how all the different complex systems come together and how we use that and we work and society builds up and we can measure different levels of prosperity, and many others, stats we would ever pull up to show whether or not a nation or a society is suffering in many different significant ways, whether it's nature or nurture problems, and how we error correct for that, and how well we as a society, the collective error correcting process, we can do that, or we just can't do that. Like the complexity inside of all of that, which delves into epistemology and understanding human behavior and our emotions. And anyways, but go ahead.
No, because it's the sort of thing where if you're trying to do this sort of consilience view of all of human interaction, from both an emotional, psychological level, as well as like an anthropological and societal level at the same time, like there's just so much to touch on, because eventually, effectively at that point, you're touching upon philosophy, and not just one realm of philosophy, as well as almost all the gray sciences. I feel like there's too much there in jumping around for me to really understand exactly what all your train of thoughts are. I'm like, oh, I have a point. Sure. You want to talk about this, or you want to talk about this, and you were losing me in some of that, and so I wanted to know, I encourage you, because there's definitely a mind there. Like there's definitely a mind there. I encourage you to focus on, either from an individual perspective or from a societal perspective, one aspect of that, and then connect everything back through that as a central lens. Because otherwise, it's going to be too much for any one person, including yourself, to express and effectively communicate, let alone grasp.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we're not going to start anywhere and focus on anything. So one of the things I wanted to get into tonight, and just the nature of the conversation, was this thing called the most cognitive bias, and see how much of us in here we see that this thing in our lives, and how much we're not aware of it, and how many more things are we not aware of, and focusing on many of the different aspects of what it takes for us to hear the people around us and love each other, and give good form criticism and appreciation, engaging in people's light and their dark from the range of all of this. We get to more care for what these things are, and actually having, like, we're not talking about like us having like 300 hours of debate over some of the, the most mystical things we can find to try and broaden this. We can deal with really tangible things that we can implement today that even help us all in our more immediate conversations get better and get better and get better as we are better understanding how to hear one another.
So do you believe that the communication breakdown is due to a lack of empathy between individuals? That is the condition, maybe not the condition, but the cause of the condition?
Well, the diagnosis, I think there's just so many different working variables here. We've got Jonathan Haidt's Coddling the American Mind, how we went from an incredible authoritarian parenting style inside of households to free-range parenting that lacked, and then standards started incredibly slipping there, to standards slipping inside of our journalistic integrity after they removed the fairness doctrine that allowed for any way that of good measure we could see that human beings were able to agree on what words mean, concepts, and do science together and figure or solve problems and come to agreements. We just started losing that as the standards just continually started to implode, as we can't uphold standards that we can't figure out how we agree upon them, as so many people are using these horrible egotistical behaviors to, no, I'm in charge here and you can't criticize me at all. I'm making all the rules now. Too many people are actually taking that as they take ownership in that. Like, I see this instead of dating life, where women are legitimately saying, not even overtly, I'm in control, I'm in charge. And I'm seeing men doing the same thing on first dates.
What's wrong with that? I mean, some people want to defer their authority to another individual. I mean, certainly you're in a date concept, because you talked a lot there. In the concept of a date, if someone is of the opinion that they should be the one in charge in the relationship that they're in, that there's got to be a hierarchy, someone's going to be on top, and it should be them, and they express that in the first date to another person, isn't that a good thing? Isn't that them being honest about what they want and how they think?
Again, so
what's wrong with that?
There's a wide range of good and a wide range of bad. There's a really good there of them being open and honest about what it is that they're looking for, but I do not think that this is a healthy thing for our society. I'm not saying I don't believe in meritocracy and hierarchical systems. I actually really do. In order for us to get to the different levels of greatness instead of anywhere in life, we have to be able to measure ourselves and know when we're initiates and how we work up those levels. So I do think people need to be in charge in many different respects. But when they are unempathetic, when they are leaders that cannot be criticized, and they do not know how to criticize their own views, when somebody is saying, no, there's a problem here and you're not hearing me, they're legitimately oppressing the other person. I really believe that oppression isn't just, it's just on a more larger scale when it's a whole government or a whole race doing it to another. This is oppression between two people where there's a problem, this conversation's not happening, and they're using all these different argument and voice devices of, you're a woman, what do you know? Or you're being emotional, and the claims of the person that is trying to speak aren't being heard. It reminds me of the Simon & Garfunkel song, Sound of Silence. I really believe he wrote that song because of this problem happening in our society in 1964. We've just gotten worse since then, especially after the Fairness Doctrine was removed and our conversations just started, the standards of how we have conversations continually started to go down. I don't.
Thank you for your questions, Jewish. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jewish.
Someone else should take a turn.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. Anyone else have a question for Thorsen?
If I may.
Go ahead, Joshua H. Joshua.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think in terms of politics too, and like world leaders on the scene, in America at least, I don't know anything else about anywhere else. But in America, it seems to me like that if you admit like that the other, and I'm putting it in quotes here, that the other side, right? Because there's definitely like sides going on.
Right.
If the other side has a point or something like that, like you were saying earlier, it almost counts as like a win for the other side, if you will. And so it almost seems like they don't want to concede that by admitting that.
Yep. Yeah. It's really fucking bad. It is so bad that we cannot say, I really agree. Like, we don't even have to say like these things of like, oh, I'll give you that one. If I'm making a good point and you agree with it, or vice versa, and we're on opposite sides, we're adversarial on a particular issue. Let's say we're debating vaccines or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. There's way to all these different topics, but we all learn. If I agree with you, I fucking agree with you. That's really good points. I really like that. I like your story, and now let me tell you where I agree with you. But we're so bad. Like, we even look at that, like however long that conversation would be. Let's say it's 20-minute conversation. Most of the time we focus on the negative. We're not talking about how much we agree, where we agree, the stories that came about that allowed us to do that and figure that out. We're not, and this I think is where we connect, not just inside of like this random political problem topic of like a leader trying to display things and whether or not we can admit the other side is right. But this happens inside of our own households too.
Oh yeah, definitely agree with that.
I'm just wondering how much of these problems stem from narcissism and kind of like the social milieu that we live under, where social media runs everything and you can curate your own reality to suit your own needs and desires and exclude everything else.
Yep. Yeah. We're dealing with a multifaceted, complex problem as we have more and more tools and the corruption of those tools and the healthy way that we are communicating. In any added more tool is going to either be used just like nuclear power or nuclear energy. We can use it to create the atom bomb, or we can use it to create nuclear energy, pretty clean energy. And that's a whole debating topic all on its own. But social media is a tool. We can use it for great things and amazing things and exchanging ideas and hearing one another, or obviously the exact opposite, what we have, people just reading headlines. And I call it the feed the beast ego war mechanism, where people are looking for the thing of how bad the other side is, and then they want to show all of their own people, look at how bad they are, and then just pick any fucking Fox News segment. Like, they're just being so catty and horrible about as they're criticizing the other side, and they're just feeding the beast of their audience of how much we hate the other side and mocking how bad they are constantly. And so it's just social media and all these interactions.
Right.
It's just
right, but that's what sells.
Yep.
That's where attention goes. When there's a lot of conflict and when people can look at themselves as the hero and kind of shoot down an easy villainous opponent.
Yeah. I in one of these intellectual circles, I heard somebody bring up that Satan is just the definition of adversary, and adversary is just a person on the opposite side of a topic with you. They have an opposing view. They are your adversary. So I can't say that word, amenthopортized, but you get what I'm saying. I have a hard time saying it. But anyways, they did that to like create this whole Satan of the other. So anyone that has a dissenting opinion is Satan. And thinking and speaking any of these words is blasphemy, and it's bad and it's terrible, and you're on the wrong side. They created this whole good evil thing. I think in that moment, I'm not saying they're the only culture or religion to ever do that, but I believe that's exactly what they did to control the minds of the masses that credulently prop them up and support them.
Right. I mean, like, society's become less and less religious, but those ideas are still foundational to our culture, and they've kind of been transferred over to the social sphere and disconnected with the religious. So, we think that we're so civilized now and reasonable, but we don't realize that, these matrices of thought have creeped in other areas, and they're infecting everything.
Yeah, we're having Catholicism versus science today, just in almost every single conversation. You can't have a transgender debate about anything that's wrong. You just can't criticize it. As soon as you criticize anything, you are perceived to be against it. So if I just started talking about the gender wage gap and started showing the problems in the ideologies of how they're arriving at a wrong conclusion, I will be perceived by the vast majority of our society as a misogynist pig. And that's terrible. We're shutting down discourse of being able to engage and look at things and figure out what's happening and why. And there's so much to unpack here. It's a lot.
Right. Yeah. So with like the micro political sphere, which you touched on, mostly these days people think in like cliches, right? So they think that if someone has a certain viewpoint, then they follow an entire political ideology, and it's easy to pigeonhole them, and therefore again, shoot them down based on what we assume they think, based on these pre-produced political ideologies.
Yep, absolutely. Assuming is an incredibly terrible thing. The point we're bringing up is we need labels, but we have, just like everything else, our language, our ability to use labels is corrupted. And how we use them is for the ego war, blame game thing of putting somebody in a box and then just completely assuming, oh, if you start talking to a person that you think is a flat earther, or you know that they're a flat earther, you not only do you not engage in that topic, but all of the other ones. If they start talking about vaccines, we assume we know all that they're going to say. And we even have confirmation bias, right? Because they do prove it in some ways. Okay, you think differently? Okay, go ahead and prove it to me. And then they do say some things that are very similar to that we've heard before, and then the same thing happens. We don't get even into the nuance of how that person might think differently. That even gets, and we just continually can't have conversations. It's really fucking nightmarishly bad. Like where we're at today. It's insane. With how intelligent we are as a human species, it is incredible to me that we are at this point. We've let it get this fucking bad in our ability to have public discourse and hear one another, where we have insane human suffering that's happening right now, at least from my view, my eyes. I think that we were actually legitimately having an oppression epidemic, a fear epidemic, an anxiety epidemic, a depression epidemic, like just all at the same time, all stemming from the oppression that is happening in more interactions of whoever gets to control the decisions isn't able to be criticized. So wherever they're right, it is really good. Wherever Donald Trump is right and made good decisions while he was in office, it is good. We need to fucking see it. We need to call it out. We need not even call it out. We need to see it. We need to love him for that. And then equally as bad, on his dark side, we need to be able to criticize him. But if we can't do this for every leader, all these lenses taint our ability to be able to do that. All these tribalistic lines and ego war mechanisms and blasphemy and all these other motivators and human pitfalls make it to where we can't do that. We just, oh man, I think that's why we got Donald Trump. I think all of this proves why we're in this, like why we got Donald Trump. Look at him when he did the debates. He never did any of the good form debating. It was terrible debating. We know this. We can see like just how bad he would just use personal ad hominem attacks to degrade everyone else, and I think that's exactly why the main reason why people voted for him, because this is how the system works. It's like a high school where you have a mean girl and all of the sycophants and then all the credulous masses that prop up that person to be in charge over that area. That's how the system works everywhere. So you want that on your side. You want the most bullish, brash person that's not going to give the other side anything, not agree with them anywhere. They wanted all of that, and for good reason too. Because this is it's hard to blame them.
If I can just put something in there.
Yeah, sorry.
I think a lot of the appeal of why people are willing to follow Trump's style is because people were so alienated and disgusted with the political machine and the the party politics in general, that, somebody coming out and speaking things as they saw them, without any sort of the pleasantries and, modalities of normality, that, people are like, hey, this is someone that I can identify with because I speak in the same way, I have the same ideas,
Yeah.
and, I follow the truth and I don't sugarcoat things. So it was kind of like a personal identification.
Yep.
Of course, Trump was using this to his advantage knowingly, in full knowledge that this was what he was doing. And, but
Yeah, there's a lot of
nonetheless, it
good there.
worked.
There's a lot of good there. There really is a lot of good there that we need to be able to see of what he was doing, and what there's a lot of good there that every leader should be doing, in being able to show that they care about their base and they're talking in a way that's going to at least disrupt through and allow them to get what they want, in any conversation that they're in. Like, they need somebody that's on their side and is going to